Hey everybody, welcome back. In today's QLab video tutorial, we're going to talk about using object audio in cues in QLab 5. Let's get right to it. So, first things first, we're going to talk about two separate things. We'll talk about setting up cues that generate audio and sending that audio to objects. And then we'll also talk about fading objects with fade cues. But first, objects that generate sound. You have access to the object audio tools in any kind of cue that makes sound. So that's audio cues, that's video cues with an audio track, and that is mic cues. Any of those can use an object. Let's take a look at how we use it in the cues. I have here in a workspace in which I've already set up a map. I've talked about that in a separate video tutorial. So we're going to assume you have an audio map and we just now need to use it in cues. The cue still has my classic levels mixer and it has a new objects tab in which we'll do most of our work. But I want to point out the levels tab because both the levels tab and the objects tab are ways of routing audio and they can both be active at the same time. I can route audio in the classic manual matrix mixer way, and if I do, we'll see that we now have this little dog ear that says that there's some audio that's going to be the result of the routing in this tab, or if I take that routing out, the dog ear goes away. Levels tab is still active all the time. You can use both of these tools at the same time, but we're going to focus on the objects tab, which is a new fancy kind of routing with objects. The first thing I need to do to use an object in a cue is to pick a map. By default, we've got no map here. I've got two maps set up in this workspace. One is a relatively realistic map that represents our research theater here in Baltimore, the Voxel, and I put a background blueprint on that map so I can really see very accurately where things are in this map. I could also use a non-realistic map like this effect panner that represents a more abstract design space to fade the object around in this non-realistic map. But I'm going to stick with a realistic map today. And I've chosen my map and I'm going to add an object to this cue by pressing the little plus button. It adds it right to the middle of the map. It gives it a default name of A, but I could double click on the name and call it something else. Maybe I'm going to call this a steam train object. So far, so good. Now, before I look at the properties of this object, I want to point out that I've added an object specifically to a cue. This object can only get audio from this cue. This is in contrast with some other products out there that don't necessarily have cues, and so they have objects that kind of are these global things that lots of different sources of audio can send to the object. In QLab, we have those, and we'll talk about them in a bit, but the kind of object I just made is a cue object which only exists within this cue, can only get audio from this cue, okay? It only exists on the map when this cue is running, is another important thing to understand. So I've created this object. Now, by default, the two channels of my file in this audio file are not routed to any objects because I could have a whole bunch of objects in the same queue. I could add as many objects as I want. And so I don't know which channels of the file should go to which objects in my queue. So I'm going to delete these, however, and just have one. And so the first thing I want to do is route the channels of my file to the objects that I want them to go to. And this is the same kind of matrix routing that you're familiar with in the Levels tab. And I'm going to route both channels of my file to my object, which I have named Steam Train. Okay, now I've routed audio from the file to the object. What next? Well, next, obviously, I want to place the object somewhere on my map. And I can just click it and drag it around and say, I want it in this corner of my theater, and QLab's going to do all the magic to make it sound like it's coming from that corner of the theater. I can set the exact precise location, the XY coordinates here if I want to enter in something, particular number or batch edit a few objects all at the same time. I can do that by selecting multiple objects. Let me add a second object here. I can select multiple objects and say, oh, I want them to all be at -600 in the x-axis, but a different y-axis, for example. So I can do some batch editing, enter some precise numbers there, and so on. You also notice that if I had these two objects selected, I can do things like select them and then kind of move them around with drawing tools. So if I had 3 objects here, maybe I'd select them all and then I could scale their location in the map and do other fun stuff like that. But let me go back to one object. And I've placed it on the map. So far, so good. There's only 2 other properties of these objects. One is color and one is spread. What is the color? The color is just a color, and it's just for you. It's just to make your objects pretty. That's all. It doesn't mean anything inherently. You can pick whatever color you want to either make it pretty or mean something to you. I'll go back to the default color here. And then what is spread? Spread, most of the time, you probably don't need to think about. Most of the time, you just have an object and you place it on your map. But sometimes you want to make the object feel bigger. It is more spread out in the room. So spread gives you an option to do that. I'm going to click in this field and drag upwards while I'm holding down the mouse. And that shows this circle surrounding the object, which represents the spread of the object. And effectively, the object, according to QLab, now exists in all of those places within the circle. It is in any one of those places. And QLab chooses the loudest volume level for each example of all the locations within the spread and uses that value. So it effectively means that if we had a spread of 0 and the object was on each one of these example locations in the map, it would sound like it's coming from just that location. Well, if you have a large spread and it's covering all of them, it's going to sound as if it is in fact sitting on top each one of those examples, because it is. It's big. It's a big object. In practice, what this means is that increasing the spread will increase the total volume in the space, and it will increase the perceived size of the object in the space. You could have an object with a huge spread coming out of all the speakers, and you could use a fade cue to fade that down to a specific location, for example, and all other kinds of fun things. Or if you just want an object to feel and sound big, you can use the spread. Or don't use it at all, whatever your design calls for. Those are the properties of setting up objects in the queue. And that's it. I'm done with creating a basic object, placing it on my map, and now I'm ready to move on to fading it around with a fade cue. So let's do that next. Now, as with so many things in QLab, things get really fun when you add fade cues into the mix, because fade cues adjust the properties of other cues. They can fade them around. We're going to take a look at what that means for objects. I am going to add a fade cue to my workspace, which is targeting my audio cue here. Now, by default, it starts out broken because QLab doesn't know what I want to fade. I could be fading all kinds of things about this cue. I'm going to look at the Objects tab. And what are my things I can fade in the Objects tab? Well, I could fade the routing of the objects, the routing of the file to the object. So if I had multiple objects in this queue, I could say, have the channels of the file start in one object and crossfade them to go to a different object. That's one thing I could fade, just like fading the levels matrix of a queue. Or I could fade the path, which is what I'm going to do. If I select the object in the queue here, I get some drawing tools to draw my path. Now there's a special case path of just one point. If I just click one time in this map, this fade cue now says, wherever you are, object, over the duration of this queue, which happens to currently be 3 seconds, you're going to fade to that location that I just clicked. And that is the simplest kind of fade, a 1-point fade to that location. But if I add more points to the path, we get more complicated fades. So I'm going to add more points to the path. Let's give it just a few to pop around. Now, if I ran this fade cue, I can see that my steam train object here, there's a little gray ghost of an object of where its current location is. And I can see if I run this fade or if I preview this fade, what's going to happen. It's going to jump to the beginning of the fade and then proceed across the path of the fade that I just drew. Let's watch. Over the course of 3 seconds. Boom. Well, that's fun. Now, maybe I want this fade path to be linear and straight like this, or maybe I want it to be kind of more curvy. So I have this smooth path option to make the path curvy. And let's say I got the basic shape that I want, but I want to like scale it, organize it, maybe flip it around. I can do all kinds of normal drawing tool things. I can translate it. I can just move it all around my space. And I can do that with just some points of my path if I want to adjust parts of the path or scale parts of the path. I have tools to flip the selected points horizontally or vertically or rotate them. Lots of classic drawing tools that are very helpful. I even have, let's select all these points. I have a tool to make a circle, which is a common shape I might want to have. So I have a circle, and this shows me the beginning and end of the path land in the same spot. I could take this whole circle. If I want it to move the other way around the circle, I could invert the direction of the path, and that inverts the direction that the object will take along the path. So just a bunch of drawing tools here for you to explore. If you need help or reminders about how to use this, there's a little question mark down here in the lower left, which can give you editing tips for keyboard shortcuts and mouse shortcuts for how to use this path editor. And let's take a look now again at a simpler path of just a few points along here, and I'll smooth it again. Now, what happens if I have created a path and my object isn't at the beginning of that path? That's a pretty common occurrence. Maybe I don't know exactly where the object is going to be when this fade cue starts. Well, in the current state of this fade cue, my object will jump to the beginning of the path and start the fade from that location. It'll just snap into place. That might be exactly what I want, but let's say it isn't. Let's say I want it to not have this sudden drastic jump across the room in this case. I have a fun little property of the fade that I can set called merge percentage. By default, it's 0, which means an object will snap to the beginning of the fade, but I can give it a percentage of non-zero. Let's increase it to, I don't know, 20%. You'll see in the fade path preview here, there's a little dotted green line that showed up. What is that telling me? That's telling me that the current location of the object, where it actually currently is, it is going to get up to 20% of this fade, or exactly 20% of this fade. It is allowed to kind of shimmy and wiggle into place, to slide into place to get on track for this fade. If it's not starting exactly at the beginning of the fade, it has a little time to slide into place so that I don't have a snap action. So if I run this fade now, we'll see that it goes from its actual starting position and slides into the fade of the into the path of the fade. Now, that is really handy for me to not have to track the exact location of an object from cue to cue and get it exactly right between cues. I can say, well, if I get it basically where I need it, and then I give the fade cues some merge, then they will do any additional zhuzhing to get the object on track at the beginning of the fade. So I'm going to use my tools. I have this steam train object that I named, and I want to just have this idea of it rotating around the room, and maybe I want it to be an oval, so I'm going to make the circle, but then I'll distort it until it's like an oval around the space, and all kinds of fun stuff like that. I'll smooth this so it's like really an oval. And now I'm pretty happy with this path of the object. I might make it not as fast. Maybe it takes, I don't know, maybe it takes 30 seconds to go around the room, and okay, now I've got this more gentle oval path of the object rotating around my space. Okay, so far so good. That is the basics of using the fade to adjust objects over time. Now, we've been fading a cue object, but you can also fade map objects in just the same way. So how do we do that? Well, we've got to make a map object first so it'll show up. My current map doesn't actually have any map objects, so I'm going to go look at my map real quick. We're not going to spend much time here because this video is about using it in cues, but let's go ahead and add a map object to this map. This is more like a global object that exists for all cues. This is more like you're used to if you've used other products with objects. There's an object that just exists all the time. Lots of different sources of audio can be sent to it. Well, that's what a map object is for QLab. Every cue in this workspace can now send audio to this map object, and I can rename this map object as well. Map train, I'll call it. and close my map out. And you'll notice in my queue, I got a new column for routing audio to my new map object. I can't change the location of the map object in this queue. That's like this global thing. I can't do it at the queue level, but I can route audio to it. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to take the audio out of my queue object, and I'm just going to have it routed to the map object. Yeah? So I've routed the channels of the file to the map object, and now I want to, instead of fade this queue, maybe I want to fade this map object. So I'm going to say my fade queue is no longer fading a queue, it's fading a map. I'm going to select the map it's fading, and now I can see the map objects as things I can fade in this fade queue. Ooh la la. Now I can give a similar circular path around my theater to this map object and have this map object spinning around the room. Now, why might I want to do that? Well, one example with this train example would be, since multiple queues can send audio to this one map object, maybe have one queue that's sending the steam hiss and click-clack of the tracks as this train goes around the theater, and then I have a second queue which occasionally sends a steam horn to this train object, so that I can intersperse a second layer of sound to the same location that's moving around the room. So that's one example of how I might want to layer in sounds to one object. Map objects give me a way to send audio from multiple queues to one object. And I can use a fade queue to fade both queue objects and map objects. So those are some of the basics, and really most of what you need to know about using objects in queues and fading it with fade queues. I don't think there's too much more to tell you, so we'll stop it there. But if I've missed anything, or if you have questions about anything you've seen, please email us at support@figure53.com, and we'd be so happy to talk to you about what your questions are and how to use Object Audio in QLab 5.